In this section of the Unit 2, we will look at the world of ancient Egypt leading up to God's calling forth of Moses to lead the people out of Egypt. We call this the Late Bronze Age. Again, during the latter part of the Middle Bronze Age, the Israelites have migrated down to Egypt as described in Genesis chapter 37 through 50. And the context that we find, they're living in the land of Goshen, which is the eastern delta area of ancient Egypt. And the shift that we talked about before in the Egyptian culture and the empire building that came as a result of Egypt being dominated by foreigners, largely from the land of Canaan. Some are even today calling the Hyksos period a term that's originated with Greek history. Hyksos is a Greek name for two words, hakuasat, in ancient Egyptian, referring to foreign rulers. That a people during the time, like when Israelites are in Egypt, migrated in from the land of Canaan over a period of perhaps 50 years or more, and eventually they become the dominant people group in the eastern delta and emerge as the controlling factor. And they will rule over Egypt for about 150 years, from about 1720 down to 1570. And around 1570, a king and his son began to organize a rebellion down in southern Egypt, which is, of course, what we call Upper Egypt, the region of Thebes and Karnak, and the rebellion that leads to Amos I, who will emerge as the first pharaoh of this new kingdom dynasty, driving these foreigners out of their dominant position in Avaris and so forth in the eastern delta area. Again, the Israelites are there, and they come under oppression during this new empire building period when we have pharaohs such as Thutmose I, Thutmose III, carrying out extensive military campaigns through the land of Canaan, and in some cases going all the way up to the Euphrates River in Mesopotamia. We actually have records and statues of deities and of pharaohs of this early Egyptian empire building period, what we call the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, which came to dominate the land of Canaan. And they will, again, at times do battle against the Hittites, all the way up in what is modern-day Syria, and so forth. So the empire-building era of ancient Egypt becomes the era of the oppression of the Israelites in the land of Egypt. So we'll look at that context and look at the kind of the date schemes in which we have the emergence of Joseph in Egypt as a leader under the Pharaoh, and then carrying over to the oppression in Exodus chapter 1, when this new Pharaoh, unnamed at this point, came to rule over Egypt, who did not know Joseph and did not relate to the Israelites in a congenial way, but instead by oppression and affliction. And so then we have, of course, the story of Moses, and so we'll look all of the aspects of the contextualization of the Exodus account, what's going on in Egypt, what's going on in the land of Canaan, and how it plays out in the biblical narrative leading up to the Exodus. The journey we will look at both in terms of geography and historical context. As they leave the eastern delta, they cross the sea. We'll look at the location potentially where the Israelites crossed the sea on dry land, moved to Mount Sinai. Where was Mount Sinai located? Again, we have at least 11 different mountains suggested as the location of Mount Sinai. And I've been involved recently in some discussions online about the identity of certain mountains regarding the location of Mount Sinai. Either way we look at it, Mount Sinai, the place of the revelation, the establishment of what we call the Mosaic Covenant. So we'll look at covenant making in the treaty vassal process of ancient suzerainty vassal treaty, as we learn from the context of the literary world of the Hittites and other cultures of Upper Mesopotamia and Anatolia. So we'll look at covenant, again, terminology that's used to describe this relationship, the definable relationship between God and his people, originating with Abraham. We'll talk about covenant and Abraham, and then the types of covenant are referred to in what we call the Mosaic Covenant in the context of this late Bronze Age world. So the background of the story of the Exodus. And then, of course, we'll move quickly into this wilderness era as described in the book of Numbers. In our description, we'll look at Balaam, the illustrious story of Balaam and his donkey, and how God turned around the intent of a pagan divination expert named Balaam to bring cursing upon Israel. But God turned that cursing into messages of ultimate blessing in the context of ancient Near Eastern world of divination. God can use whatever means He wills to reveal Himself and His program of blessing for Israel and ultimately for the nations.